So, on Ebojo, Meyer Greenfield Dijnakas, Piwe non Kwen Donjba, Kibwak First Nation Donjba, Piwe non Kwen Endayang, Nourish and Donoki. My name is Meyer Greenfield, and I'm from North Bay, Ontario. My family is from North Bay and Kibwak First Nation. I live in North Bay, and I'm very close to Nipissing First Nation, and I'm situated on the Robinson-Huron Treaty, and I'm speaking to you from my home in North Bay. I'm the Indigenous Program Manager here at Nourish, and I'm joined by my colleagues on this call too, Jen Reynolds, Robin Speedy, and Rachel Chang, who's very graciously helped me with the tech today. We also have members from our Indigenous and Allies Advisory, as well as our Nourish Advisory, present with us today too. And it looks like we have about 50 folks on the call today, right now, or 60 actually, I just looked again. I'm so excited that you're all here today to listen to Kelly, Gordon, and Kitty RLynn Lickers share their stories and teachings of the fall harvest for Nourish's Food is Our Medicine Action Learning Series. As we begin, I'm just going to share my screen for a minute. Hopefully you can all see that okay. I'd like to acknowledge that this is a difficult time for Indigenous communities and can be especially for some who have been asked to speak at the many events that are being held this week for National Truth and Reconciliation, but also for Orange T-Shirt Day. My thoughts are with all these folks who are presenting at this time because I know it's a big week for all of us. My thoughts are also with Indigenous communities as they continue to uncover children who are buried on residential school properties across Canada. I know that they began in Sault Ste. Marie the other day, which is close to me and has been very heavy on my mind as there were many children and families from friends from Nipissing First Nation who attended Chingwak. Tomorrow is also Orange T-Shirt Day, and I hope everybody was able to find a shirt to wear. And also from what I've been reading is that I know it can be a bit hard to find because there are big companies that are selling and profiting from this right now. So if you haven't been able to find one, that's okay. You can donate and you can participate in learning and unlearning during your day tomorrow. I'll share some links in the chat in a little bit that can support you tomorrow. And hopefully not just for tomorrow, but for days to come. So turning to Food is Our Medicine, we began this learning journey with fall to honor Brian Sinclair, who on September 21st, 2008, died as a result of being neglected for approximately 34 hours in a hospital. And also for Joyce Echequan, who died in a hospital as a result of neglect 1 year ago yesterday on September 28th. Brian and Joyce went to the hospital to get help because they weren't feeling well. Both Brian and Joyce were neglected to death in a hospital because they were Indigenous. So neglect of and for Indigenous communities is happening across Canada, and it presents itself in different forms. And what I've been looking into and reflecting on and listening to with conversations and having conversations over the past year with Nourish, a common theme that I'm finding is access, or a lack of access. So access to healthy and traditional foods, access to proper healthcare, access to medicines, both Western and traditional, access to clean water, access to education, and the list continues, and I'm sure many people are thinking of things that are happening in their organizations and communities with lack of access to Indigenous needs. But by all of us gathering here today, it shows that we are ready to make some good changes. And many of us here today have the opportunity to work together to create access for Indigenous communities to have access to these important life resources. So if you haven't done so already, and if you're comfortable sharing, if you'd like to type who you are and where you're from and your favorite fall food in the chat. It's nice to see who's here and to know a little bit more about each other, because I know these live events can feel a little bit strange sometimes. And then hopefully we can continue to connect and contribute to reconciliation together. So today we're hosting our second webinar in our Food is Our Medicine Action Learning Series. These webinars are based around the Food is Our Medicine learning journey and the 4 seasons. So we began earlier this summer in June, where we heard from my friend George Cucci from Nipissing First Nation, who spoke about the importance of cultural mindfulness. And he shared his understandings of how the residential school system, along with the 60 Scoop and Indian hospitals, have caused massive intergenerational trauma for thousands of families across Turtle Island, and how it will take generations, many generations, to heal from this trauma. So we'll be sharing 3 more webinars after today in February, March, and June as we reach National Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st, 2022, where we've set a goal of having 400 learners complete the learning journey from 100 different organizations. I'm happy to share today that I looked right before this webinar, and we have more than 500 learners signed up for the Food is Our Medicine learning journey from over 250 different organizations. And we have 23 who have completed the learning journey today. So my hope for the next hour or so is that for us to listen with an open mind and an open heart as we piece together what we can do to create and strengthen access. And if you have any questions or reflections, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And we're going to be saving time at the end for a discussion where I really hope everybody feels comfortable enough to speak up and have conversations with one another. So in saying that, I'd like to welcome Kelly Gordon and Kitty RLynn Lickers from Six Nations, who will be continuing our fall Seeing the Path journey by sharing the importance of the fall harvest. Miigwech.
Scano, Sego, Adi, hello, everyone. I'm Kitty RLynn Lickers. I'm a 62-year-old blended baby of my barefoot Onondaga daddy and my Swedish Sami mummy. I'm the community food animator at Six Nations Health Services, and I'm very honored to be here sharing stories and time with you today. I have a couple of things that I'd like to share before I take you into the cornfield and onto the land with me. Even though it's virtual, I'm going to take you, you'll be on the land with me as our souls touch. Tomorrow is Orange Shirt Day, as Mayor said, and it's not the first one, but it is the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It will always be known as Orange Shirt Day for me. I was 37 years old when the last residential school closed in 1996. I didn't go to a residential school. My parents, my dad in particular, protected me from that. Being in the service, he moved us and situated us in living places where I was protected from being taken in the 60 Scoop. But the impacts on my life are many still. And I have chosen to navigate these impacts. And the way that I've chosen to do it is to gather and share knowledge about food sovereignty, the importance of connection, and with much love, feeding people. That's my key thing. So for me to acknowledge and honor all of the children who were in residential schools and who were impacted, who some did not make it, and those that are continuing to still struggle with the impacts. I share this knowledge, these stories with you today. We continue our ways of knowing and being with all of them in our hearts. So I'm going to ask you, because we can't be together, and normally I do this differently, but I'm going to ask you right now, just for a moment, to close your eyes and listen to the sound as I take you into the cornfield with me and onto the land. Imagine yourself walking into the corn as it stands in the field. It's fall, and you can hear the sound of the corn rustling against your skin, touching you. And there's many, many, many cobs So now look, open your eyes and look and see all the cobs that you can see. There's so many. There's many of them, lots of them. I was really honored when I was asked to talk and when Kelly asked me if I would come and tell stories, because that's kind of my thing. I'm sort of a storyteller. So I took you, now we stand together in our souls in the field of corn. There's corn all around us. There's the remnants of the bean plants hanging off of the corn stalks. There's squash all around all of that. Those three sisters, our sustenance of our Haudenosaunee way, that's all around us. Now, when I generally talk about corn, I have this huge science portion that I do. I talk about how the corn grows, and someone asked me once, how long does it take to make a bowl of corn mush? And I take them through the whole process of putting the corn in the ground and watching it grow and all of that. So to make a bowl of corn mush for yourself, it takes in and around 8 or 9 months, depending on how your garden grows. So it's not something that you just go out to the store and grab and grow. I talk in particular about our white corn, and I'm just going to share with you a little story about what happens when you have beautiful cobs of white corn. This is one of mine that I grew. It used to be quite full. I left them on a table on my porch last night. And what happened was they became this, because not only do I have a really beautiful place to grow food, but I also have lots of friends, and my raccoons come up on the deck and they ate my cobs of corn because I left them on the table. So usually I show you some really lovely corn, full cobs. If you look at it though, even though, and I do have more because one of the things that in our house hangs everywhere is braids. So when the corn is planted in the ground, the seeds are put into the ground, and I soak my seeds. I put them in a mound. When I was growing up, we had a huge garden, and corn was always planted. And there was lots of things we grew. We even grew peanuts one year, and we've grown a lot of really strange things over the course of my life, but the corn was always my favorite. What would happen when we put the corn in the ground? The corn seeds go in first, before the beans, before the squash, and they go in the ground. And my dad would always stop us first, and I would see him moving his lips. I would see him saying things. And because he was admonished by his parents, his dad in particular, to not stay on the reserve, to not claim his heritage, to not be part of his culture. I think he did it quietly without teaching it to us, because there was such a strong connection for him. He couldn't not do it, but he also wanted to honor and recognize his dad telling him not to. So consequently, I didn't have that for a long time. I was very fortunate and was able to have faith keepers from the longhouse come and teach me what to do, how to plant my corn and my mounds, and to also grow tobacco. So the corn would go into the ground first for a couple of weeks ahead of time, before the beans, and then finally before the squash. It's not the instant gratification gardens that we've grown accustomed to. The corn needs it needs that amount of time ahead of its sisters. Corn is the oldest sister, and she needs time to grow. As a child, what I would do is I would wait for the corn to be about 1.5 feet high. So just about knee high is what they say. By 4th of July, knee high, 4th of July, then your corn is on the right track. Ours would be taller by then, because white corn grows taller. But I would wait for that, and I would go into the garden and I would take blankets and pillows and my toys and my dolls, and I would make a house in the cornfield. And I would lay down because for some reason, even though I didn't know then, corn called to me. I talked about it with a clan mother once, and she said it was talking to you because you had a job to do and they had lots of things to teach you. Because I would hear almost like voices coming from the corn as it moved in the breeze and in the wind, and that sound when it would dry, that beautiful sound of it rustling against me. I would lay in there and I would read and play and listen, and I would listen because in particular, our foods. I know the big thing is to call it our traditional foods, but for me, I say it's our foods because not just me as a Haudenosaunee person have my foods. Every one of you out there have your foods, the foods that are particular to you. So I say our foods, and our foods for us was corn and beans and squash, but many other things too that connected all of those things together that would make. We've had lots of discussions about how we would have seasoned our food, and there's still that debate about whether or not we would have used copious amounts of salt or not. And my friend Rick and I still get into that, where we're convinced that we would have used a lot of salt on our corn. There's whole seasons of things that happen, and there's not enough time in this this day for me to share each of the things from the season. But putting it in the ground and having it start to grow, growing the mound in such a way so that you can harvest the beans without disturbing the mound is impactful. And then letting it grow, letting the corn get tall, watching as the older sister reaches for the sky, and as the baby holds on to her, and as the middle sister protects them both from all around. The impact of all of, there's about 300 versions of Three Sisters story, and the impact of it, for me, the most important part of it that comes out of it is understanding that corn has been a part of our lives for thousands of years, not months, not decades, not hundreds, but thousands. Corn came to us, and again, this is the scientific portion of it, came from South America. It came as a grass that looked like it had little corns on it. And then it was cultivated into this hard, crusty, ugly ball. If you've ever had an opportunity to see a picture of what corn was like, and originally it's this brown, flaky looking, not pretty looking ball of seeds crammed together in a husk. But that part of it, all of that, tells us and reminds us that it's part of who we are. Not only did it progress from being little seeds on a stalk, but it also we progressed with it. And I am fond of telling people that we were, because there's lots of discussion about how seeds are altered and how they're made different, and we as a people are for sure did that, because corn would have hung in the greenhouse or in the longhouse, and we would have only eaten this end and this end, and those really nice kernels in the center would have been the ones we put into the ground. Well, that alters what you get the next year. So you take the best seeds of the best seeds to get you to there. So the summer goes along and you put your best seeds of the best seeds in. It grows. In about the middle of August, we have a ceremony to gather green corn. That's a really has a really thick, milky component to it, and it comes out, and it was for babies. And because when you rehydrate it, even if you dry it, when you rehydrate it, there's still that milky component to it. That would be for babies and elders, someone who was not well. There's so many nuances of why corn in particular is impactful to us. I remember the first time we had white corn, then we shared it with a family that was near us, and we gave them the bag of ashes to do it and said, when you were ready, we would come and help you prepare it. Well, they thought they would just do it themselves, and it's a fabulous thing for them to have, taken the adventure to do it themselves. But what happened was they put the corn off the cobs into a pot to boil, and of course had no understanding of why the ash was important. And it just cooked to this huge gelatin, gushy, mushy kind of thing. And of course they tried it. And I remember my friend Kathy, she was one of the kids, and she was like, I don't know what you guys eat, but that corn stuff you guys eat is nasty. It's mushy and bleh. We know none of us liked it. We even tried putting butter on it. I put jam on mine, she says. I'm like, oh, jam on corn, I can't imagine. But I was envisioning the beautiful white popped out corn from the shell that the ash takes away, which is a beautiful process in itself, where the ash is put into the water, and it literally in a chemical reaction, because there's no other way to put it. It is a reaction between the corn and the ash, where it takes that hull off and makes a beautiful color, the color of our shirts. And then that goes away, and inside is this beautiful white corn that's there for us to eat and share. So after August, we then carry on, watch our corn grow. The older sister, the baby sister's been harvested. Some of the middle sister may have been ready, and her fruit is harvested. And the oldest sister, the corn, stands alone in the field, and her arms are usually up. They call it her cape. And as time goes by, because her sisters are gathered, she drops her cape and she tips her head forward, which is that tassel on the top of the corn. And if you think about driving, you see cornfields and you see the tassels on a lot of them are tipped down like this. Instead of being up, they're tipped down. That's again, here's the science, the pollination. But as the oldest sister, that's her putting her head down, saying, I'm done for now. My sisters have been taken. And she knows that they're being held by families through the winter, but she puts her head down to tell you that she's completed her task, that she's done what her responsibility was to grow and to grow the corn. So she bows her head down. Once her head is bowed, that tells you with a certainty that it's time. It's time to go out and gather those cobs. And that's generally in October. If you'll see the tassels at the top of the corn bowed down. It's time for you to gather your white corn then. There's a really cool thing that happens between the tassel at the top and the silks that are on the corn cob. For every silk which is the female component of corn, for every silk that's hanging out there, every single one of those, like an umbilical cord, is attached to one of the kernels. There's not a kernel that has occurred on a cob without that silk, because until it's pollinated by the top of the corn, no corn kernel can come. There would be, there's a lot of discussion now about the cross-pollination of corn, because corn is very, very promiscuous. It's like, oh, you've got pollen, I'll take some of that, pass it on over here. And then you end up getting your sweet corn crossed into your white corn. I get asked a lot, like, where do I plant my Flint corn or my sweet corn if I'm planting white corn in this corner of my garden? This is what I tell them, and this is with a certainty absolutely works every single time, to know how far apart to plant them. You gather your corn, say Flint corn, if you've got white corn in your garden, you gather your Flint corn, you put it in a bag, you put it by your pillow, you go to bed and wake up just as the sun rises in the morning. and you take that bag of Flint corn and you start walking, and you walk until the sun has set. And when the sun sets, you lay down, put your corn beside you. In the morning when you wake up, a whole day of walking, that's where you should plant your Flint corn, that far away from your white corn. There's no other way. There's lots of times where you see people, well, they'll bag the corn so that they don't cross-pollinate. There's a whole process where you can stagger plant them. No matter what, because like I said, corn really loves to share. So it teaches us that. But they at some point turn another way to do it is to plant only one each year. When we planted a long time ago, and this is what I know and what I've been taught, is we would plant corn in large areas, and quite often there would be a bush line and sunflowers to stop the pollination from coming from no matter how far away. And we know from experience now that when corn is planted too close, even within 2 or 3 kilometers, it's too close, that it cross-pollinates. So when we talk about our foods and protecting our foods, that the ways of planting and caring for them and knowing when to put them in the ground and when to harvest them and how far apart to plant them, those are impactful things. And those things are shared more by story. So when I do this story with children, I'm like, I got my white corn in the ground and I put my Flint corn in a bag and I put it by my pillow and I went to sleep. And I woke up in the morning and I started running because I was excited to plant. And then I got tired and I walked slower and slower, but I kept walking and walking and walking. I walked for all day, and I got all the way to way far from my house, way like all the way across the county, farther than that. And then I planted my Flint corn the next morning. Children love to reenact that. If as adults, we can think about those things, about the protection of our plants and how we should be planting and when we should be planting, that can be taught by story. I have so many corn stories, and I only have a few more minutes left to keep talking. There's so many corn stories. I wanted to show you things. I wanted to show you my Flint corn that I grew. And it's got lots of white in it, not because it was white corn was in it. My friend tells me that the corn grows the different colors because our DNA is in the ground, because of who was in the land where we planted it, because that's a part of who we are. So that becomes part of the corn. So when I eat this, when I take it off, and I most often, my colorful corn like this, most often I'll use it as a mush. When I take that off, then I remember who came before me. A friend of mine says, be the answer to your ancestors' prayers. And I think every time I grow corn, there's a part of me that's doing something that my ancestors would have wanted us to do. I think I wish I would have asked Kelly to tell me when to stop, because I lose track of the time. If I can share with you this, the most impactful thing that you can do with someone else now, especially, is connect. Sometimes we don't know what to say. And with COVID, we can't reach out and throw our arms around each other. So what I do is I will very often just give someone food, whether it's a few kernels of corn to plant, whether it's some squash seeds. Although just recently, because squash was very prolific for me this year, I've been giving squash away, whole squash. I'm like, there's seeds in here, collect them. I think that's what we have to do. We have to connect to each other. And that's what I love about this about Nourish and about this program, that it encourages that. It encourages all of us to connect together and share. There are probably questions about the corn, and I could keep on going, lots and lots about what to do. I'm just gonna do one more story and I'll tell you about braiding the corn really quickly. So when you harvest the corn, you keep the tops on and then you braid them. The first braid is the most important, and you braid up and then you tie it at the end and they hang up to dry, because when you, even though they're hard, when you pick them in October, they still need to dry. And my friend said to me, you know how they knew you were a good woman, that you were going to be a good woman, was if your braid didn't fall apart when they shook it. So they would pick up our braids and shake them to see if they were going to stay together. I'm just going to say I've never had a braid fall apart, but then I'm also reluctant to give them to people to shake. So maybe there's a reason behind that. Nod at me, Callie, if it's time for me to be done. Okay. All right. So thank you very much. I'm so glad we have left an opportunity for questions at the end. So when we get there, please ask me lots of questions. I have lots and lots of fun things that I could share, and I will have hopefully answers to your questions. Yeah, for listening and being here and sharing time and being part of my day.
Yeah, Kitty, I learned so much in there, and I'm really excited to have a bit of space to share as well. Sego Sego Guego. My name is Kelly Gordon, and I'm here on the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. I'm Mohawk. My father is a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, Tyendinaga, and my mother is French and Acadian. So I also come from blended ancestry. So I have a slide actually that I just sent you recently. Maya, are you able to share it, or do you want me to share a screen? Ah, beauty. Okay, thank you. She asked us like 4 days ago, do you have anything? I was like, oh no, but then I realized this morning, and just even hearing Kitty talk, how much corn has impacted me. So when originally Maya reached out and I was like, yeah, I can talk, but I really wanted to invite and engage Kitty. And as you all just listened and heard, so much knowledge and so much shares. And I was like, I don't have that kind of knowledge or those shares yet. But as I've been reflecting on this ask and just even hearing the conversation this morning, so many images came to mind. And then I thought, hey, I actually want to share some visuals with you as I speak today. But before I do that, I just wanted to show you guys, look. So I just wanted to give myself that test, and I'm really thankful that not one just fell off, but that's a corn braid I did a couple years ago now, of Flint Corn from the community. So it's not a huge braid, but it's a solid braid. So I guess that's a good sign. So I feel really proud right now. So I have worked as a community dietitian for most of my career, coming up upon 20 years, and in recent years have entered into more of a leadership role supporting the health promotions team at Six Nations Health Services. And I spent most of my career working in this community, a small time in Toronto, well, about 10 years in Toronto, working with different community health centers and Indigenous organizations in the city of Toronto. And I'm really fortunate and offer a lot of gratitude to Nourish and the opportunities I've had over the last 6-7 years to connect with the team at Nourish, and was involved with the original Nourish cohort as an innovator, and then have been working as part of the traditional food project team. And now I help to co-chair the Indigenous and Allies Advisory that supports and guides a lot of the work that's going on within Nourish, including the Food is Our Medicine campaign. So proud to see that come full circle. I've spoken at webinars, and some of you may have attended and heard me speak about those connections and, you know, everything that's come out of Nourish, which is just so amazing and provides a lot of hope and a lot of pride just in the work that's been accomplished over the last while, and just acknowledging and thank all of those that have supported and contributed to that work. So with the images, I've just thought I would use them sort of as a guide to provide some conversation. So I want to start with that first corn braid in the top middle. So that's white corn. So as Kitty talked about white corn, and that would have been one of the first braids I was taught to do. And fortunately have some really great teachers in our community that showed me how to make a good, strong braid and how to do it, and then have been able to share and educate and teach others on how to prepare to harvest corn and then prepare it for drying and move through the whole cycle of how you can utilize that corn for sustenance. The next picture there is some beautiful Flint corn, and so interesting because when Kitty shared the story about how far you need to go to move between the fields, so packing up that corn and walking for an entire day and then waking up and then knowing that that's where you can plant your corn. I've always heard you want to leave at least 5 miles between cornfields, right? Especially if you have a white corn or different varieties of corn seed. And the story she shared about how that corn grows from the ground, and as we are people of the land, how we influence that land and that corn. I always thought that the white corns were like, oh, we planted too close, or oh, the wind must have been blowing a certain way to lead to that cross-pollination. So it was really interesting and a new learning for me to hear that story of how our corn, especially our Flint corn, looks so diverse and so beautiful, and to have a different and a greater understanding of why that is. The Flint corn fields are so close to my heart and so beautiful. I didn't grow up connected to the community or connected to my Haudenosaunee roots. So a lot of my learnings have been granted to me as I've moved through the pathway of being a dietitian. So my professional pathway has really connected me to my learnings as an Indigenous and Haudenosaunee woman. And the Flint corn fields in this community are so beautiful. And as I showed you the braid here, and I'll just show it closely because the diversity that exists in these corn cobs as you find them, there's so many joyous moments, I guess, I've had in these fields. One example or one story I'll share is we took a group from one of our mental health and addiction programs out. So we tried to do land-based learnings and bring community members and program participants out onto the land. So one Friday, we had gone, a group of us, to a Flint cornfield in the community and just kind of showed people, like, here's how you trudge through, like, here's how you harvest a cob of corn, because many had never done that. And what came of that is we started kind of exploring. So you come, you harvest your cob and you open it. And as you can see from the ones in the pictures, the ones I just shared that are in my office, they all look so different and unique. And it became like almost like this Easter egg hunt where people would be like, hey guys, come and check this one out. And whoa, this one's got pink kernels. And just the excitement and the vividness that came from that moment was so memorable and it was so remarkable. And just to hear the excitement that a group of adults had just uncovering these beautiful cobs of corn was so special. But what it led into is just different stories and different connections to really positive memories that people had from their experiences growing up that tied back to that corn. So I love when I see the Flint corn fields and just the fall skies, and even Kitty's story about the tops of the corn. So that acknowledgement of, I'm ready, I've done my job, I'm here for you to come and harvest. I've never heard that story either. So thank you, Kitty, for sharing that, because we kind of all wonder, well, is the corn ready? And we all have our resources. We'll text different people in the community, hey, can I pick corn now? But it's great hearing and understanding just some of the teachings around how you acknowledge and how you know. I remember hearing from someone in the community around sumac, when the sumac berries turn bright red, you know it's time to start hunting. So I always remember that now, as all the sumac berries on the sumac trees are starting to turn red, I was like, oh, okay. And I always remember that, and I'll always remember that story. And you can see in this picture, it's a little bit blurry, but a lot of the tops, there are a few, but majority of them have turned over. So the tops have kind of come down and honored and said, hey, I've done my job, you ready for you to offer you this corn. So that bottom middle picture is the food of, like, here's live corn. So Kitty talked about those white corn kernels puffed up there. So they almost look like beans, like a navy bean or something in this picture, right? So that's a corn kernel. So you take your small corn kernel after you've dried your corn, and then you have your little dried kernels, right? So they're quite small, and many of you are familiar with what a corn kernel would look like. And then those have a really hard shell on them because they're dried. They'll last a really long time to protect and save that seed. But by boiling this in water with the ashes from hard wood, it creates that orange color that Kitty spoke of, and it softens that shell. And it pretty much quadruples or 5 times, or if not more, in size. And it softens it, and it makes this beautiful, textured, filling, delicious piece of corn. So that in this picture is the lyed corn, so L-Y-E-D, lyed corn, with wild rice. There's pumpkin seeds and squash in there, probably flavored with a little bit of like maple syrup. And it's just such a delicious dish and just like fills your belly. So it's one of my favorite ways to utilize white corn. Very popular in our community is corn soup. So making a corn soup with the white corn. But within our team and within our program, we've been doing lots of work to expand and explore different ways to utilize white corn. The next picture is Flint Corn braiding. Actually, that's the braid I have here with me today, the one I shook and it's still good. So this was from last fall, and we promote opportunities in the community for community members to come out to the field to harvest and learn how to braid, eat a bowl of corn soup, visit with one another, and just getting people out onto the land. So this is my daughter, Frances. She just turned 12, and me showing her how to make some corn braids. And you can see she's holding hers up there proudly, and it's staying together well. So just having those opportunities that I never had as a child from my dad sharing elements of culture and being Mohawk with me, but having learned these things and now able to share them with my daughter are so important and special to have these moments and opportunities to share. And again, spending that time in that Flint corn field and hearing my kids share excitement of like, whoa, look at that one, right? When we have the different cobs of corn. And then the top picture there, the top left, the group of us. So this is a group of nourished participants and attendees and supporters gathered together on Six Nations back in 2018. So I can't believe it's been that many years since we were all here. But when Kitty talks about connection, like I think of this picture. I think of the laughing, the voice. It was all women gathered together, spending time, sharing stories, and just connecting on the land. And essentially like corn was our connector. So having that time together was so important and memorable. Again, like there's memories I hold in each of these images that I'm sharing with you today, and the memories of that time together, and women from nations from all over the country. So from Haida nations, Inuit, Métis, so people that corn doesn't have the same presence in their culture and their stories as it does for Haudenosaunee people. And it was so amazing to hear their excitement about learning about the corn, feeling, touching, being with that corn, and how that was important to them was wonderful. And I think part of how I wanted to kind of summarize or wrap up some of these stories today is the Food is Our Medicine campaign takes you through a learning journey. And one of the pieces of the learning journey that really stands out to me is one of the last teachings that's shared. So in our final learning journey, Summer, I think teaching 16, talks about how do we acknowledge the space and create the space and the time to do this work. So sharing stories, so taking this hour today to hear stories from Kitty and myself, that is the work. Spending time on the land, sharing a meal, listening to elders, connecting with each other. How do we create space and place and time in our days, in our work environments to have these exchanges? Because I'm sure each of you are going to take away something different from today, but surely something meaningful, and translating that to how does that impact your work, your own increased self-awareness, and then the work and the impact that you'll have in the communities that you're supporting. So I really, admire the work that's come out of the Food is Our Medicine campaign, the acknowledgements, and I think looking to really challenging ourselves to make this space. Because even for myself, to go out to the cornfield is if I have time, or I hope I really can get to that in my day. but how do I shift to make that a priority, and knowing what impact that has not only on me and myself and my own well-being, but the impact I can share then with the community and with the team and the work that we're doing to support wellness in the community. So I say nyawa to everyone for listening today, and thank you, Kitty, so much for sharing, because I never think I know everything by any means, but just listening to that, how much I learned from you, and it's amazing. And Nyawa, thank you so much for that, and to each of you for joining today. So I'll pass it back to Meyer, and hopefully have some time for some questions or comments from the audience.
Miigwech for sharing. Those are beautiful stories, and I'm really hungry now from listening. So what I'm going to do is there is one question in the chat. If folks have more questions, you can put them in the chat, but also I'm going to try and open it up to see if I can invite people to come on the video. So the first question is from Kathy. How do you separate the ash from the corn kettles after boiling?
So the corn, you boil the water, you put your corn in, you pour the ash in and you stir it, and it has to cook for a while and it'll turn orange. Then when it's time to take it, once it's turned, that color has gone, then you strain it. You have to remember ash and water together are caustic, so you need to wear good strong gloves. But you just strain it out, rinse the corn, because it has to go back in and cook even longer. It's a good long process. It's a couple-hour process of taking off, but it gets dumped off, and you never dump that down a drain. It always goes on the ground. The ash and the water always goes on the ground. But you rinse it off with water.
Right.
And I think it's usually something that you have to do multiple times, right? So I found sometimes when I've lied corn, I've done it 2, even 3 times. So it's a lot of water and rinsing. And it's interesting because we've actually had conversations around the amount of water it takes to do this, and how would have that water been accessible prior to running water, and how that would have been done, because you need to wash and rinse and rinse and rinse, and then often boil again and do a second round, depending on how soft, or if your corn has actually popped up and that shell has softened. So it's a large volume of water, and usually a good couple hours of work. Hey, Kitty, what would you say to lye a batch of corn? How many hours would that take?
It would take a couple for sure. And I had the good fortune, I think I should call it good fortune, of doing it in a traditional way. We literally went and hauled the water from the creek, and we cooked it outside on a fire. And it didn't take just a couple hours doing it that way. And I had good, you have your corn basket, a corn basket, because you cook the corn in the boiling water, add the ashes, it turns orange. You watch it cook, you wait until the skins start to slip or get slippery, and you have to take it out, rinse it to touch it. And then you dump that out, and you put the water on. When I did it, I did it with Archie Bombery. He had me show up at daybreak. And when I was going home with my bag of corn, lied corn, it was dark. So if you were doing it without all of the modern amenities of a stove and running water, it takes all day. So, but it takes a couple of hours. The basket that Kelly has, we were really lucky. We got to have someone come in and teach us to make them. That in particular is a corn washing basket. And if you look at the braid, and Kelly, you did a really nice job. It's braided really nicely. It's actually woven like they're over, under, but in a certain pattern, because you put the corn in there and you rub the corn on the inside of that basket to make the outside come off. The outside covering comes off in that basket, and you shake it like that. And again, Kelly, this would be a good test, because you have to test if the bottom of your basket's going to hold this over time because the baskets they're black ash, and they were meant to last for years and years and years. But I had someone come and tell me a story about the basket that they made was a little bit loose, and about the 4th time she used it, the basket fell off of the handles. So yeah, there's lots of lots of fun stuff about baskets.
And I've never actually trialed this. This is my show basket because it took 2 days to make and we offered, and that's part of some of the offerings is not just the food, but the processes attached to those foods. So how do we teach our community? And some know, but many haven't been taught. How do you acquire the skills and the supplies to make these resources that support all of our food ways, right? And that's when we talk about our Haudenosaunee food and food ways, because the ways in which that we obtain these foods, there's almost more to that than there is about the actual food, right? And I don't know if this one would hold up. I'd be curious, but it was always interesting to me if we were going to do lying of corn and using just like a stainless steel strainer or colander. It doesn't have that abrasiveness, like Kitty said. So part of this is having that roughness when you're shaking your corn to strain the water through as you're rinsing it. That's what also helps to make that nice, soft, kind of puffed up piece of corn. So it was so interesting to me, like all of the combinations of the ash from hardwood, using black ash to make the basket. Like there's reason and significance and learnings in all of those pieces of that information that are tied into that food way or that process.
And it's hard to remember that would have just been things we did every day, because there was no getting up and doing your hair and going to work. It was, you woke up, prepared for the day, fed yourself and your family, and then you did things like you made, baskets need repaired, so you repaired a basket, or you needed to go out and harvest beans, or you had to harvest squash, or the corn was ready. All of that was our day, right? So there's more to sharing the food now. It's even more important to share the food, because at that same time you're sharing how much of your day you chose to make food for someone. It's impactful. It's not, you didn't just throw your white corn in the microwave, right?
And I think to add to that, we have producers in the community who this is their livelihood. They produce live corn and they sell it at local stores. So a bag of live corn, about this big, so is anywhere from $12 to $15 depending on the producer. And people would often, question, oh, it's expensive. Like that's a lot of money, $12 to $15. But then once people engaged in the process of going out and harvesting, braiding the corn, drying the corn, processing the corn, there was a greater understanding to what's attached to that and why the cost was so much, because of the amount of labor and the love that went into that process. So I found it was really interesting. Even for myself, we would buy it for program use. And then when we started actually learning and diving deeper into the process, we were like, wow, she should charge $30 because it's a lot of work. Like what Kitty said about that, dusk to dawn process.
That's the whole 8 to 9 month, that's the timeline for making a bowl of mush, right? Mm-hmm. Right from growing it to making the bowl of mush is about 8 or 9 months.
I think Tessie has our next question for you.
Thanks, Meyer, and thank you so much, Kitty, Kelly. It's such an honor to hear your stories and see photos and have wonderful memories of being together. I wanted to ask a question about, as someone who's non-Indigenous and wanting to practice allyship, can you speak to sort of that balance of honoring the stories that I've heard or teachings that have been shared, but without any risk of either appropriating stories or sharing things that haven't been, that aren't mine to share, but sort of finding that balance of respecting the culture and respecting the stories, without appropriating.
So one of the things that the first thing that I tell people when I tell stories, that I say, I'm going to tell you some stories, and the stories are going to be about corn, and you're going to want to share them. So it's going to be important for you to say, this is what I know, this is what I've been told, and this is from, and if you know the person, that's super great. Acknowledging where that information has come from. And then making sure with the person who's giving you the story that you let them know it in some way. If you can, if you can't, then you do the best you can. That I have told them I'm going to share these stories. Because Tessie, I would love for you to tell someone the story, especially like children or even adults, the story of how far apart to plant your corn, because that's important. Not just we need to know that. Like, so maybe you'll tell a farmer who'll go, well, maybe I shouldn't plant my corn in that field because it's really close to where they grow the white corn. That might be impactful. So acknowledging this is not my story, but this is what I know and this is what I've been told. I say that a lot. A lot of times you'll hear me say, this is what I know to be true because this is what I was taught, or this is what I was told. Because even some of the stories are not mine. I certainly don't have firsthand experience going out to a mound that's in the outside of the palisade of a longhouse. So that's a story that's come to me, and I'm blessed to have people that have shared those stories. That's what I think is the most important thing. The most important thing. Don't declare yourself an ally, be declared an ally, and acknowledge where you've gotten the information.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, so we still have about 15 minutes. If anybody would like to ask a question, please go ahead. But if not, I might ask Kitty or Kelly if you'd like to share another story, because I know you have lots.
There's a really cute story I'll share while people are pondering their questions, because I know full well that every one of you out there have this tiny question that's like, I shouldn't ask that. I don't know. No, ask it. Really, that's how we learn things. That's how we share information together. But let me tell you a cute story about shucking corn. So big, huge amounts of corn come in, and it's a job that men and women do together. And there's a story that says when you're shucking the corn, they would put all of the women together, the younger women together, the ones that were kind of searching for a husband. And they would give them all of this corn, and you have to peel the corn back so that it's like this to braid it, to dry it. And if one of the young girls found a corn that was red, like this part of it, under the kernels had a red hue to it, they were going to be the lucky one to get the next man, the one that was going to be claimed up to be claimed as a wife or in a relationship. So that story got shared, and we're sitting in a big group. There was a group of us, and we had this big building. We were doing corn. We must have had, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 cobs that we were doing it. And one of the ladies got the cob with the red on it, and she picked it up and she flung it across the room at another woman. And she goes, I have already had a man. I'm not having another. So as she threw it across the room, you could see the red, and one of the women that were to the side jumped up in the middle like a football player and tackled that cob of corn and said, I'm having it. And she took that cob of corn. Interestingly enough, the following year she got married, and she wasn't seeing anyone before that. So there's got to be a question about that story. There has to be. When I think of the colors on the cobs, so Kelly has the really dark, and this is a Flint corn as well, even though it's got lots of, there's a name for this one. And this one's from down in New York. This particular corn I got. So the original kernels to plant for it from someone in New York. When we talk about being part of the land and the belief that we're in all of the things that grow, and our ancestors are in all of the things that grow, it makes me feel like we're very blessed, because the colors tell us about the different nations, because they talk about the red Flint corn being more, that's the Mohawk Flint corn. Miss Kelly, that's the Mohawk Flint corn. It's got that red hue to it. And then when they talk about Cayuga Flint corn, it's got that dark, deep blue to it. There's more Cayuga in that corn than there is anything else. And it's interesting now, more often than not, you'll see the Flint corn is more mixed, even more mixed than it ever has been. So I'm the chat is coming up and going away quickly because I have this thing when I'm on Zoom, I have to look at a person's face, so I missed them. There was I think there was a question. Kelly, did you catch it?
I caught it. I can read it for
Okay,
you.
great. Okay.
Curious to know if Kitty or Kelly have seen the corn harvest in their communities change over time because of climate change. That's from Rachel at Nourish.
Okay, so Kelly, is it okay? I can talk about this because there are things that we are seeing. There was a time when, as I said, corn started out as just on a grass, came a ball. We modified it. We literally modified it by choosing just the best of the best kernels. There was a time when our white corn could be in excess of 1.5 feet long. And that was because the growing season was so good and the moisture was adequate and the ground was well nourished. And climate change climate change has changed our seasons. I know that if you really sit and think about it for a minute, there's been a shift in our seasons. Think of how more often than not now we have a lot more time where there's hot, dry, no rain, only to be then followed by torrential rains. Things as crazy as tornadoes in Ontario, right? Those kind of changes, all of that changes the climate, the air, the water amounts, all of that changes how the corn grows. We're getting back to the smaller of the cobs. The corn will be maybe 1 foot long now. It has more anchors, and I don't know if you know what those at the bottom of the corn stalk. It puts out little shoots that look like chicken feet almost, and those chicken feet are more prevalent and thicker and stronger. There's a great picture, I wish that I had taken the time to find it, of Kelly peeking out of the corn patch at the community garden, and the corn towers over her easily by 2 feet. It's super tall. We've grown corn at the community garden continuously. Well, this is the 10th year. And each year it's not as tall. So the climate change changes how the plants grow, but more than climate change, the inability for us to continue to nourish the land as it should be nourished, to amend the soil as it needs to be amended, that's impactful as well. Sure. I just know one of you want to ask a silly question. There's got to be one. We got to have one silly question before we finish up. Someone generally asks me something really cool. Yes, that was a gray kitten that you saw run across the screen at one point.
I see a question here. How do you make the corn mounds, from Kim?
Oh, okay, so a corn mound, depending, when I talk about a mound for someone to make a personal mound, you put one knee on the ground and one hand, and you have the other knee up and the other hand up, and where you can reach out with that one arm, that's the center of your mound. There's a beautiful story that I will share with you about making a mound. So I kneeled and reached and chose the spot in the center. I dropped a rock, so I knew where the center of it was. And I started to walk around the circle to flatten the grass to make it. At the time, there were 6 or 8 older gentlemen that would come and sit at the community garden and watch me. And they would sit at the table with their coffee in hand and there's smokes. What is she doing? What is that crazy girl doing? What are you doing? And I would ask them every day to help me. They would bring their coffee. They'd sit and watch. I'd ask to help. I learned to stop asking because they would leave as soon as I would ask them to help. So they're watching me, and all of a sudden, one of them stood and they all came over. One had a walker and he held on to the man in front of him. He didn't use his walker. They walked in a circle, flattening the grass for the mounds I was building. This story always makes me cry. And as they were walking, and remember, they were like between 60 and 80. And as they were walking, one of them started to sing in the language, a song. I asked them after what it was about, and he said it was about us doing our job, doing our responsibilities, doing what we're supposed to do. But they all sang, and they thanked me afterwards for bringing that back to them, because the one man, he's gone now. He said he hadn't done that since he was a little boy. So all of the components of our food have impact. That picture in my head, because I didn't dare go grab my phone to take a picture of them. I didn't dare. It was important. For just a moment, they were all young boys, stamping the grass down to make that mound, doing it together and singing at the top of their lungs and enjoying themselves. Granted, the next day again, they were back at the table with their coffee and their smoke going, what's she gonna do today, that crazy girl? But it was still wonderful for that day.
Maya, can you let me screen share just so I can show a picture of one of the mounds from the garden so people can just see one too?
Yeah, I think you should be okay right now. Can you?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
thanks.
That's the mounds that they helped with, Kelly.
So just maybe talk, so again, we have our corn in the
Yeah.
center, then our beans. So different types of beans, everything I've seen from like green beans to scarlet runner beans to skunk beans, all sorts of different beans, and then
Yeah,
different types of squash. Yeah.
pretty sure those are cranberry beans that grew in that mound. And we did acorn or winter squash with that. And that's white corn that year. But that was the mounds that those men made. They flattened the grass for that. And you just reach, the center is where your corn goes. And then the baby sister beans go around that. And you allow time in between. The corn has to have a couple weeks to break through and grow so that it's faster and ahead of the beans. So the beans can then crawl up it as the corn gets taller. There's a real, I wish that we had that, could find that picture, Kelly, of when the corn was really, really tall. In that mound, that the two mounds that were over to the side.
But does that help answer, Kim? Does that give you some like a visual and just the story Kitty shared of how do you plant it?
The amount of corn in the top, for me, I always, I put them at the very flat, because you flatten the top a little bit. I do between 5 and 7 kernels. I was told to always do it in those amounts, 3, 5, 7, 9. And I've always had, been fortunate enough that they've all come up and they grow and then they hold each other up as they go up. And that was part of that was because Southern Ontario used to have nice, strong breezes in the fall, and that would hold the corn from falling without creating those anchors. That was part of that, because the anchors take a lot of strength out of the corn.
Miigwech. Miigwech for everyone for sharing these beautiful questions and stories. And we're going to follow up with some more information. I think there's some more questions in the chat that I can follow up with on an email for all the participants. So now I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to close us in a good way. So, miigwech, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm having construction done in my house, so I might have to pause every once in a while for the contractor to do his work.